Okay, we've been talking about rear axles. Everybody knows what a ring gear and a pinion is. And you remember seeing the video that I put on YouTube about changing the seal in the differential? Remember that 6-8 minute video, whatever it was? Did that on a Friday morning with the student that was here at the time. That he came in that Friday morning just to help out with that. And do you remember on that video why it was that the seal blew to start with? Brendan, have you seen that video? He needs to see it, don't he?
You're talking about the one where you had to unscrew the nut and count the turns?
Had to count the turns on the nut. You remember that? You saw it.
Like
Okay, if you got a seal blown, or any seals blown on any like engine, or if it's a transmission, or if it's a transfer case or anything like that, all of these sealed gearboxes have got vents, transaxles, transmissions. The engine is vented through the PCV system because of the combustion pressure that gets past the rings. But these other units actually have little vents. Have you ever seen one of them little things that looks like a plug screwed into the chamber, and it's got a little tin cap dancing around loose on it? There's one on that van, on that engine on the stand out there. I can show it to you. That's a vent. That lets air. If that vent gets stopped up, all of a sudden the air cannot come and go as the oil heats and cools, and it creates pressure inside that gearbox, and it blows the seals. You got it? That's going to blow the seals. Now, if you remember in that video that I took, Chase Graham, I told him, I says, look, around the nose of that gearbox back there, it's greasy. And it's obvious that that seal is leaking, and it's been leaking for a little while. Okay, so whenever he checked the rear end grease, he screwed the plug out, and he reported to me, when I screwed this plug out, it's a pipe plug, half-inch pipe plug with a square, and to put a ratchet in, screwed it out. When I pulled that pipe plug out, it went. There was air trapped in there. There should not have been air trapped in there if the vent was working. So after we replaced the seal, we said we need to find out why this seal blew. See, if we just put a seal in there and it comes back leaking next month, you see, got issues. So I said, see the vent? There was a vent. It was screwed into the axle tube, and it had a hose coming up, curled over like that. It was just a shaped hose. Now, why would they do that? Why would they put a hose that was coming up and curling over like a question mark with just an open end on it? Water, particularly. All right, so we pulled that hose off of there. We screwed that fitting out of there, and we found out the fitting was stopped up. Now, the orifice, you can see it on the video. It's real plain. Yeah, remember that? That stopped up vent. That's an important thing to remember. Okay, we're talking about these American rear axles. Now, for a long time, rear axles were made by companies, like Spicer made them. They made a Ford Motor Company made their own rear axles and stuff like that. But when I was in my yellow Jeep, you can drive my yellow Jeep, and I got that yellow Jeep over there when it had 11,000 miles on it. And during that period of time, the late 90s, in the early 00s, the rear ends on a lot of these Jeeps were noisy. Yang, 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 gears singing and stuff. And if you're driving down the road on my Jeep, you can play with the throttle, with the load on those gears, and you can hear it singing. It was like that when I got it. It was under basic warranty when I got it. But that singing rear end didn't bother me a whole lot. I think it's got 170,000 on it now. If it's really loud, it's going to drive you up the wall. But that one wasn't all that loud. All right. Let me also go on to say that we've got a 2004 Explorer, and I got to get a differential and a transmission, and we got to cram those in there before the end of the semester. Okay, because we're not going to be working on anything like that next semester. Got that? So anybody feel like they can make that happen? You got to change the chunk. Got to change the transmission. You got another transmission job to do besides the Jeep. This one here's an Explorer. And all of this stuff, you notice how this stuff gets shoehorned in right at the end of the semester? That's what happened with that Expedition one. All right, never mind.
They're supposed to bring the Jeep,
huh? They told me they were going to bring it today, and I have not seen it. I have no, but one way or another. 10 and a half, maybe it'll be here in a little while because I told them we would be out of here probably between about 10
What about the other truck?
Yeah.
What's Jorge doing?
Huh?
What's Jorge doing?
He was actually getting ready to get set up to go talk with people at WIA and all.
What?
WIA, Workforce Investment Act, Career Center.
What is that?
That's a tuition assistance thing. 10.5-inch American rear axle replaced some earlier model rear axles in these Jeeps. The Dana 60 and the Dana 70, were replaced by the 10.5-inch American rear axle. And the ring gear diameter is 267 millimeters. How many inches is that?
200 what?
267 millimeters.
It's a little over 10 inches.
That's a pretty good answer because I just said it was a 10.5-inch rear axle. That is the diameter of the ring gear.
I was going off
In the back of that green GMC truck out there is a ring gear. Go get it. It won't take you but a second. You'll reach in there, find that ring gear, bring it in here in your hand. It's not attached to anything. It's just by itself. All right. And we're going to see how long it takes you to find it. All right. All right. Now then, there's an 11.5-inch American rear axle that replaced the Dana 80, which is 11.5 inches, 292 millimeters. All right. You got gear ratios available on these of either 3.73 or 410. Ooh, 410. That's a racing rear end, isn't it? Yeah. All right. American Axle, the Taurus I've got has got a 3.45, gear ratio, 3.45 to 1. Okay. What does that mean now? Somebody tell me again. Chelsea, what does it mean if I say 3.73 to 1 when I'm talking about a ratio in a rear axle? Anybody know? 3.35, 3.73 to 1, or 4.10 to 1. What's the difference in those two?
How many times the drive shaft's got to revolve with the back wheel?
Exactly. How many times if the 3.73 turns 3.73 times for each single turn of the wheels? That's why you got 3.73. The way you write that is 3.73 to 1. That's how you do that. That's very important. Huh? Pardon me?
So what's
I'm about to ask him.
Well, I mean, ask the question.
What it is, but it's
That is, that's cool that you brought both of those. This right here is a sensor ring for the wheel speed sensor. But let me see that. All right, now this one right here. What size do you think this ring gear may be?
We're talking about an 8.
Now, I'm a little disturbed that he thought this might be a ring gear, although it does look like a ring that is a gear, right?
Hey, Mr. Rich.
But for the time being, this gear is going on the floor. All right, this is the one we're going to hang on to right here. Okay, yeah.
So is it better to have a lower ratio than
Ah, that's a good question. It depends on what you're going to do. It depends on what you're going to do. Now, what would it mean if you had to have more turns of the gear after the class is over? I need this cleaned up because it's pretty dirty. Brendan, give me a rag. All right, I'm going to pass this around. Throw it to you like I did that. Wow, you'd have to be a hall sketch yet. Brendan, I asked for a rag, buddy. Dirty hands here. Brendan is my gopher today. All right. Stop beating on the lifter. All right here we got 3.73. Remember when I told you the story about the gas mileage that I didn't like on my Ford truck? And it had 332s in it. And I went down to 275s.
so kind of the lower ratio?
Actually, it didn't take as many turns of the drive shaft to drive the wheels. And what did that do? That doubled my fuel economy. Now, if you want more power, you're going to want more turns of the drive shaft, which was like a 410. You know what I'm
Why do
saying?
you want more turns of the drive shaft?
Because there's going to be a lower ratio, and you're going to have
Torque.
more torque. Yeah, you have more power.
I
You know what I'm
see
saying?
what you're saying.
Now, when you talk about these guys that are gearhead racing nuts, they got 410, 411, 413, whatever. Their gear ratio is. The lower that gear ratio is, the bigger that number is. The more power it's going to have, and the stronger it's going to be. Now, the other end, the police interceptors, will typically have a high speed rear end in them for speed. I mean, they're not police interceptors aren't worried about getting off the line. And there was a 69 Plymouth Border Patrol car. There was a police interceptor that we had over there that they bought, surplus or something. The guy at the gas station, his mama drove that car. Had 180,000 miles on it. Had a 383 engine in it with the 440 heads on it. And it had a shift kit in the transmission. And it had a real high-speed rear end. And when you went to take off on that thing to start with, you wouldn't think it was going to do very much. But when it went from first to second gear, it was about 50 miles an hour, and you'd hear rubber. Well, yeah, and from then on, that thing was a rocket. I mean, if you were running about 50 miles an hour, just about whoever you were out there next to, on the 4-lane, if you popped that thing to the floor, you would run off and leave them. I mean, that's how strong that thing was. It was a stud. 69 Plymouth Fury 1. They just had tape over the place where the wires went through to the light that used to be on the top. You can see where they take off. But anyway, that was a cool car. But it had a high-speed rear end in it. That's the point. And it would really sail going down the highway. Speedometer, read 140 miles an hour. All right, now you're going to need to know some information. So you got information. Now let's see if you got any questions, answers here. Let me see. They got anything about information here? Let's see. We got 10 questions on this test, and we're going to look through it. All right. Here we go. Look at question number 6. Information about an American axle can be found, and this is a brand name now, not just an axle that's made in America. An American axle can be found either on the identification label or stamped on the axle tube. General Motors typically has that. They got it stamped on the axle tube, but this particular one is like that. All right, the code on the label contains the manufacturer part number.
Oh, that's the one there.
All right. Technician A says information about American axles is found on the label attached to the axle tube. Technician B says it's stamped on the axle tube. All right.
What did it be?
It says information about an American axle can be either found on the identification label or stamped on the axle tube. Yeah, it sounds to me like both of them guys are right. All right. The code has the manufacturer part number, the revision level, and the axle ratio. The ID label lists build information, such as the time, date, manufacturer, and if the label is not there, you can find it stamped on the axle tube. On the Ford, there's a little tag that's under one of the differential cover bolts. Yeah. And if you look at that, you're gonna see some numbers on there.
It's like that on Jeep too.
Yeah. Oh, some of them. Watch this. You're gonna have this right here. That's one of the things you'll see. Like I'm just giving you an idea. That means it's an 8.8-inch ring gear. Then you're going to see another thing over here, close to the bolt hole, that says that's the gear ratio. And see, I mean, if you can sort that stuff out, you'll know what it is. All right. So now the cool thing about this right here is the ring and pinion gears are standard, and they're not a whole lot different from anything you've ever seen. Okay, the ring and pinions are a max set. I told you about this before. Remember that? Now, some of the pinion gears had variation markings on them. Like, for instance, if you looked on the end of the ring gear, somewhere on the ring, not the ring gear, the pinion gear, it would basically have a +1 or a +2 or a -1 or a -2 or whatever. Like, let's say that you pull the pinion, the ring gear and pinion out, and they had a shim for pinion depth, which is, where's the shim for the pinion depth located? It's between the gear and the bearing that presses on it, right? Mm-hmm. All right, you're going to measure that one, and you're going to you were supposed to look at the gear you had, and if it had a number on it. And this was not a universal thing, but in some places in early days that did this, if this gear had a -2 and the gear you're putting in had a +1, you'd add 0.03 of an inch to that shim.
Why 3,000?
Because -2 +1, you're running up to 3K.
Oh, okay.
That's how you do that. Now they don't hardly ever mark them that way anymore. And these weren't marked. They just one of the reasons is because pinion depth, as far as I've been able to tell, is not quite as big of a deal as backlash and whatnot. The pattern's got to be right, and the pinion depth may have to be altered for that. But you're not moving that pinion gear very much. I mean, it's just a tiny amount. But anyway, there's threaded adjusters that are used to set ring gear backlash. Now, you remember what I told you before. The preload on these bearings in these things are really, really critical. That means that you want this gear to turn, but you don't want it moving any other kind of way, right? And so whenever you're on the Ford and the GM, what we would do we got these little shims that go on either side of the carrier bearings, the carrier being the part that the ring gear is bolted to. In other words, this part right here is bolted to the carrier. And the carrier's out there. That gear ratio, that gear that you got in the back of that truck is actually a positive traction gear. And this actually came out of an Explorer. But, I mean, it's a positive traction carrier, huh?
Well, that's 8.8, isn't it?
Yeah. All right. So what we have here, we would take and we would have, and the guys that do a lot of this stuff would have a whole bunch of shims. Them shims are real expensive. But ideally, the parts department will have a whole gaggle of shims in stock that are all different thicknesses and everything. So you're going to set it up so that you actually have, they're snug going in so you can push them in with your thumbs, right? Now get this because it's important. You're going to push those shims in there with your thumbs. This is on the GM and the Ford. You know the shims I'm talking about. They're cast iron shims. They're on either side. When we pulled that rear end out there apart on the bench, there was these two ring-looking things, and they were shims, and they were looked like they're about 1/4 of an inch thick or maybe a little thicker. Well, there's various different thicknesses of those. And so when you were setting this thing up, and we're going to be talking about some patterns in a minute, you would shove them in there with your thumbs, and you would subtract from one side and add to the other side to move the ring gear and the pinion, change the relationship. And we did that on Wes's rear end the first semester he was here, the one that he was putting in the race car or whatever. All right, so once you've done that, and you've got it set up just like you want by pulling the shims out real easy and putting them in where you're pushing them in with your thumb, they're snug, but they're not really tight. You haven't set your preload, but you are setting your clearances. Then you take your mic and you add 0.4 of an inch thickness to each one of the shims, and you put them back in there so that and there's actually a special tool where you got to tap them back in there because it's real hard, and then you have to spread the axle case on some of them. When you get them put in there, then everything's preloaded, the clearances are right, and all that. Well, the cool thing about these American axles, and Dodge has done this before on some other ones, they have nuts that you turn. I'm going to turn on this projector so you'll see what I'm talking about. They got these nuts that you can move the axle back and forth with. They got little lock bolts. They got lock bolts that are used to secure the adjuster after you do your preload and your backlash, and they're covered in detail, elsewhere in the book. But all right, watch when this comes online. Look at these cool pictures. All right, you see these little things here? Those are nuts that are screwed into some threads, and instead of having shims like I was talking about before, you can actually screw these. Screw this one. Like if I wanted to move that ring gear closer to the pinion is behind it in there, and if I wanted to move it that way, I would screw this one that way, and I would screw this one that way an equal amount. And that way, whenever I got it all set up, and then everything would be fine, see? All right, now look at this. They've got these little dogs here in place. It's a little bolted heavy wire thing, and it goes down into two of those, and it keeps those from moving. If you don't have that, they're going to screw themselves loose and have issues. And the differential pinion shaft is retained in the differential housing with a snap ring. You're going to have to use a hammer and a punch on the side of the shaft that has a hole. All right, see that? Now you understand what I'm talking about here? All right. All right, now there's a pinion shim bearing that's in the pinion head, so on and so forth. The differential pinion shaft. All right, here's your differential. Look, there's the pinion shaft. You see the pinion shaft? That's the pinion shaft right there.
Put you together to make it part of it.
Well, there's a better way to do that. Look at this, though. Have you ever seen anything like that, Wes?
Yep, that's locking down too.
Yeah, track ride differential. It's a track ride helical differential, limited slip versions. The track ride, they got 6 helical differential pinion gears and 6 pinion brake shoes. Those little brake shoes stop it from turning. There's your little brake shoes. You see them? That's going to provide some resistance to the wheels turning opposite directions. Now that's kind of weird, but it's pretty cool the way that they did that. All right. All right. Got the 2-piece case, 2 side gears. See the case like you see in that top left picture is all one piece. This piece they're talking about, you can unbolt it and take it apart. All right. Now, what does helical mean? When I'm talking about helical gears, what am I looking at? Can you tell me what makes those gears helical?
It means it rotates around a central gear.
You're talking about planetary gears, huh?
And cut of the gear or something.
Yeah, it's crooked. I mean, they're not straight like spur gears. They're actually cut at a slant. The teeth on them are. That's what that means. All right. The fluid is different from the other axles. They use synthetic gear lubricant as a factory fill. You know how much that synthetic lubricant costs? We actually in a Ford we put a set of the pinion gears. You know, the axle gears, little pinion gears in the middle. We had to replace those in a Ford truck. Paid $65 for the gears. And you know how much the oil cost to fill that rear end was? $45 for them, that little bit of oil. It was so much that whenever they processed it up front, they wanted to know if I made a mistake. Because that was a lot of money for oil. But they had to have that as a positive traction rear end. But there was a Chevrolet truck that had some tore up gears in it like that. And when I priced pinion gears for that Chevrolet truck, they were $550. That's for them little gears in the middle. It's crazy. On that Ford, they were $65. I don't know why. All right. And they looked like the same gears. I didn't see any difference in them. All right. You ought to be aware there's a 500-mile break-in period. It should not exceed 50 miles an hour when loaded. You know something? Pulling a load, you shouldn't go over 50 miles an hour on that particular one with them positive traction. Okay, now then, axle noises. Let's talk about axle noises here. Going to be related to vehicle speed. 3 categories: howl, growl, and whine. Okay, now listen up. Let's talk about what howl is. Howl is an oscillating sound associated with a run out of rotating components. Growl is a low-pitched sound that's caused by bearing. As a matter of fact, I got some sound files I made off of an Explorer we worked on here. Whine is a higher pitched and is the most often related to the mesh between the ring and the pinion gear. All right, so if the ring and the pinion gears are mismatched, I'm going to tell you about this story. One time, when I had never been into a rear end before, the heck it's back in 77 or whatever it was, I can't remember. But I took this, I put these rings, and I don't even know why I was changing these gears, but I had a brand new ring and pinion gears, and I just figured, well, I can take stuff apart and put it back together as good as the next guy. So I took that rear end apart, I just threw it all back together, and I took that Plymouth down the road, and those gears were just singing like you would, yang, 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 yang. And so I found out that, no, you have to do it just a different way. You got to have the preload right, the relationship between those gears got to be set up right. The gears are matched to one another. All right, now.
So what causes it to start picking?
Those gears, believe it or not, and I've said this before too, and I don't know if y'all remember or not, gears can look good and sound horrible. Whenever somebody brought my daddy a transmission out of a Volkswagen, a manual transmission, they said, this transmission's making noise in second and third or whatever. You know, we want you to rebuild it for us, and we're going to be putting it back in the car. And he says, I tell you what, dude, go put it back in the car, drive the car over here, so I can drive the car and I'll work on it. But I'm not going to rebuild this transmission unless you go put it back in the car. Because I won't know if it's fixed or not unless I put it back in the car and drive the car. And so he had to hear it before he would even work on it. You see what I'm saying? Because if you look at the gears, they will be beautiful and smooth, and they may not have any marks on them at all, but they'll sing like you wouldn't believe. So gears will do that. Gears will look good and sound horrible. Like if you hear a noisy rear end with this singing, whining rear end sound, you know, it's sort of a singing, ringing sound to it, and you say, well, I'm going to pull this apart and see what's wrong with these gears. So you pop the cover off. They may look beautiful. Now what does that mean? What are you going to do? You know what I mean? You know? And if the gears are mismatched, you're going to have issues, you see. All right. I mean, what I'm saying is if they've run out of line to one another long enough to where they've changed the relationship between them permanently, you'll never get them to be quiet. You just got to put the new gears in there and set them up the right way. Okay, whatever the nature of the axle noise, you got to do an inspection. It's always a good idea to look at it, clean it up, see what you see. And, you know, we'd be surprised how many times you have to put bearings in them and all that. You're going to look at the fluid for contamination, look for bits or pieces of metal, see all that. All right, you ought to be able to measure backlash. Now, what part of your driveline final exam is going to be a backlash measurement? Part of your driveline final exam is going to be setting and checking the preload on the pinion gear. You better know how to do that. There's worksheets on that.
Yep.
You guys have seen those
Me
worksheets.
and Brandon.
Yeah.
Not hard.
Don't play dumb with me, okay? So if I, I don't hear that noise. All right, so whatever the nature of it, you got to inspect it. Now you're going to do this. Going to do a backlash, variance, and so on and so forth. Let's go on around here. Let's get through with this. We're almost done with this here handout, and then we're going to go through these. Look at all these tools. Have you seen tools like this before? Yes, you have. Well, you may not have been here when we did it, but we did it. We did it.
We done that one over there.
Sure did. We did it over
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
He was looking at his phone without even looking at the screen and said, nope. All right. Correct pinion depth. Got a smooth running axle. It places the pinion gear in the proper position in the housing and allows it to mesh properly with the ring gear. Then his pinion depth special tools. Now I tell you, you know how country boys did?
What did they do?
They would get that gear, and this guy named Mike Chancellor that I worked with years ago, he didn't have none of these special tools. He says, and I was asking him, I says, what's the right way to set these up if I don't have any of those tools? He said, you just bolt it together, and you paint them gears like you're painting your porch. And you turn it through, and you look at the pattern. And you keep moving them gears, the pinion depth and the backlash and all, until you like the pattern. I thought that was sort of strange, but it worked for him, and he never had a comeback. Well, I got to looking in the Ford shop manual. Darned if they didn't have marking compound and have doing exactly what he said. That's how you do it. You know where he learned that? General Motors School, 1972, or something. All right. Yeah. Anyway, pinion depth special tools. They say you got to use those. First time I ever saw these was in 1984. They had this chunk in the Mercure XR4 Ti, and we went to school on that, and they showed us how to set these rear ends up. All right. Now, you got some special tools there. You can use the ones. All the measurements are got to be taken with the bearing cups in the axle housing. We've already been over this. You can see that. Now, look here on the bottom right. What is this right here that they're looking at on the bottom right side? What is that?
It's a bearing.
Bearing, and what's the gear that it's hooked to? That's the pinion gear. See that shim? That's your pinion depth shim. And there's a collapsible spacer that actually goes on there before you put all of it back together. All right, you got your backlash adjustment. You see this? You're going to crush the spacer, but if you over crush it, you got to take it back apart and put a new spacer in it. Right? Now the preferred backlash setting. Look at this. This is important to get a rule of thumb. 5 to 7 thousandths of an inch is what your backlash ought to be. That's how much movement there is between the gears. 5 to 7 thousandths. You just about got to have a dial indicator to check that. Now, I will tell you this. Me and Wes didn't actually use a dial indicator on the rear end. He was more than we just felt of it. Clink, 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 clink. That feels about right, Because, it was a race car anyway,
It makes a little bit of noise, but I don't care.
Yeah. All right, you're going to install the differential case and the axle housing, and you're going to tighten the left adjuster. See that? Now, if you're moving, what happens if you've got no backlash?
It's going to burn it up.
The gears heat up, they span a little bit, and they burn it up. All right, when it's properly adjusted, the total torque to rotate measurement should be torque to rotate.
Not only drowns out that noise.
Now listen, see this, look at this, guys. This is extremely important right here. See that? You're going to be doing a final exam on this. Watch. See this right here? See that little inch-pound torque wrench? I've got one of those. And you're going to adapt that up to a socket that will go on that nut. And this is going to be how much it takes to keep that thing turning. And that's for the total rear end, all of it assembled. Not how much it takes to start it turning. You got one right here. Look, if you've got used bearings, it ought to be 25 to 45 inch-pounds. If there's new bearings, it's going to be 30 to 50 because they're going to wear in some.
Hey, Mr. Ruth.
Yeah.
So what's the purpose of taking the nut off and working the bearing?
Because you're going to pull if you're changing the seal in the rear end, you don't want to have to totally set everything back up like you were building the rear end. The reason we turned it is to make sure that we put it exactly back where it was, and we didn't change the preload. Wow. Now, if you just zip it up with an impact wrench, you got too much preload. Now you've squeezed your crush sleeve. Now you got to take it out of there and put another crush sleeve in there. You just can't do that.
I got it.
See what I'm saying? So if you're just going to change that seal and you want to get that done and get that car out of the shop, move on to your next job, be really careful to count the turns. You're going to mark the shaft, mark the nut, mark the collar, mark the whole darn thing. And it's usually 16, 17 turns. Basically it's going to get it off of there. But make sure that you put it right exactly back where it was with the marks lined up. And that way you don't have anything to worry about. That light blue Crown Victoria I did that on has been driving now for 3 or 4 or 5 years after we did that. It ain't leaking in the morning. It ain't made no noise. There's no problem. If I'd have just zip with an impact wrench, it would have already caused all kinds of issues that we wouldn't have to deal with. All right. Gear tooth contact pattern test. You're going to create about 10 pounds of pinion rotating torque. Rotate the pinion yoke. Yeah, look at that. Oh, we got pattern analysis. Look at here. This is the proper pattern confirms the correct. This is when we were painting the porch. See the painting the porch thing? You can actually see that. I've got some marking compound called Prussian blue that we can put on there that'll show us how they're contacting each other, right? It confirms the pinion depth. Now here's 24A. See that? See how it's supposed to look? See that pattern? That's how those teeth are supposed to be making contact. Got it? All right, now look at 24B. That's an incorrect pattern, and the ring gear is too far away from the pinion. See what you got there? You understand what you're looking at. Understand what you're looking at, because you can fix the rear end this way, and it's not all that complicated. Now, now we're going to go 24C. That shows the ring gear is too close to the pinion. Now, you see the difference between that pattern and that pattern? See it? Look at 24B and 24C. See those numbers? See those patterns? All right, now you got 24C, too close to the pinion, which is 24D means the pinion gear is set too high. The depth is, too close.
Hold on now. What was the middle?
The middle one?
Yeah.
You talking about C or D?
The one with the little angle. I don't know. I can't tell.
I think it's D.
Upside down.
Everybody needs that page for a reference, don't they? If there's paper over there, they'll be
C,
coming
I guess.
out.
Which one's C? What's C? What's
C?
Yeah.
Look at C.
What's it mean?
There's C. 24C shows the ring gear is too close to the pinion.
Okay.
You saw a picture in your test, didn't you?
Yeah.
All right, look at 24D. What's 24D? Means the pinion gear is set to, in other words, the pinion depth is too deep, right? Confirm the pinion depth, change it to a thinner shim, and that's going to get it farther away. All right, if it's set too low. Now, look at all those patterns. Now, get that sheet out of there and look at it. That right there is an absolutely terrific reference for this. See what I mean? And anybody that's interested, and Wes really doesn't think he'll ever need that, but there's going to come a time when Wes is going to say, doggone, I wish I'd have kept a copy of that piece of paper. All right. And there's your hubs. See the snap ring? Look at the hubs up there. Snap ring, big nut, that kind of stuff. Got it? And we're on our last page. Okay, now let's look at these and see where we're headed with them. I'm going to turn that off. All right, because we ain't got a reason. I don't want to use my bulb up, you know what I'm saying? Now let's whip through this test right quick. We're still getting out here in record time. I'm trying to keep this moving fast, but let me explain something. If I'm in here doing theory and lectures and all, you shall not surely die. Okay? Okay. You got to listen. I try to keep it as interesting as I can by picking on Brandon and stuff, you know what I'm saying? And, all right, so Brandon's really looking forward to his alignment. We got to get him over here on that. Number one, after a new differential bearings are installed and an American axle and proper backlash is set, what should the total torque measurement be? We went through that a minute ago. New bearings.
30 or 50.
Let's see. Number two, when setting up for pinion depth measurement, the arbor will not turn in the arbor discs after tightening the bearing caps to specification. What should you do next? Confirm proper disc alignment in the bearing cradles. That's not, that's tool specific there. During a road test to confirm an axle noise concern, you identify a low-pitched sound you classify as a growl. What causal components or conditions does this indicate?
Damaged or worn bearings.
There you go, damaged or worn bearings. The rear hub seal on a 10.5 or 11.5 inch American axle should only be replaced if it separates into two pieces when removing the hub. What do you think? That's false. After performing a gear tooth contact pattern, number 5, we've already figured that one out. That was a dog. It was D. Right. Okay. It'd be good to memorize that because you may be hit with that later. You know what I'm saying? I would darn sure be looking into that. burning that in, guys. Okay, number 6. Technician A says information about American Axle is found on a label attached to the axle. Yeah, you already knew about that one. That's it. All right. Number 7. Which of the following statements about track right differentials is not true? A, the vehicle will not move when a differential failure occurs. B, a two-piece differential case is used. C, 6 helical cut differential pinion gears are used. D, the clutches in the differential are the only serviceable parts. Obviously, that is a bad answer, so the rest of them are right. 8, the preferred ring gear backlash setting for American axles is between what? That's number 8. You got a C on that one. When assembling an American axle after adjusting pinion depth, which of the following components is reusable? Anybody know? Can you identify any of those parts?
I think it's going to be
What is the collapsible spacer? That's the piece you're going to have to replace. So you know that ain't right. The pinion seal. Wouldn't you replace the pinion seal? Okay, and I will tell you this. I didn't do it on that Crown Vicky, but if you did it right, you'd put a pinion nut on it too. However, if you catch yourself here on a Friday morning, there's not a new pinion nut anywhere in town, you use the old one.
The flange.
The flange is the only part. That's the part where it drives you have bolts up. You're obviously not going to replace that unless it's damaged. Which of the following is not true about American axles in Dodge truck? That's going to be B. Now, before you bail out of here, let me see. Hold it. Let me see if I can find. Let me see if I can find this recording I made for the chassis here on that somewhere here. I got a sound file that I did, and see if I can locate that. Okay. Hold on. I'm going to stop that.